Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday afternoon Parasha class. I am not Rabbi Shaya, but I'm standing in for him as he has asked me to give his class today as he is away. This week's Torah portion of Terumah focuses on the second half of the book of Shemot. If you wish, the book of Shemot can be divided into two halves. The first half is the Jewish people's experience in Egypt, slavery, and the redemption from the land of Egypt. And the second half of the book is the building of the Mishkan, the building of in English, tabernacle. And the simplest explanation is a portable tent-like structure that would accompany the Bnei Israel as they would make their way in the desert. They leave Har Sinai. We've already received the 10 commandments and the law has been given. And now that we journey away from Mount Sinai in the desert, we are making our way to the promised land. What are we taking with us that Moses brought down from Mount Sinai? The 2 tablets. You will recall the first set got smashed as he saw the people dancing around the golden calf. The second set, which he carved out himself, are placed inside the ark. And any of you that saw Indiana Jones knows that the ark was this incredible golden box, and it was a structure that the Israelites carried around with them in the desert. It was in the center of their encampment, symbolically as well as structurally, as if to show that this was the heart and the focus of the nation. From this week's Torah portion, for the next 5 Torah portions, all the way through to the end of the book, we will be detailing and listing and creating and building the structure of the Mishkan, the portable tent. Whenever they encamped, they built it. It was like an IKEA bookcase, if you'll excuse the expression. And whenever the cloud lifted and the people would journey on, they dismantled it, wrapped it back up again, and carried it on wagons, and the holiest of items they carried on their shoulders. And that's it. That is the second half of the book of Shemot. They would build, construct, deconstruct the Mishkan every time they camped and every time they journeyed. And this opening parasha speaks of Moshe's request for everyone to give a contribution, no matter how big, no matter how small, whatever they may wish, for the building of the Mishkan, for the building of the tabernacle. That is this parasha, and that will be the next 5 parashas as we make our way through over the next 5 weeks. However, all is not as it seems. Because there is not only one creation story of the building of the Mishkan, but there's another creation story, a much more basic creation story at the very beginning of the Torah. What is the original creation story? God creating the world. We will spend half a book on the creation of a Mishkan. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of verses. And the verses are so technical in their description. Do you know how many verses it will take to describe God creating the world?
Like 20 psukim or something?
You're close. 34. There are 31 verses in Bereshit chapter 1 and the following 3 verses at the beginning of chapter 2. Those 34 verses are all it takes for God to create the world. And yet, fascinatingly, when it comes to the Jewish people's creation of the Mishkan, we will speak about hundreds of verses. And what's even stranger is the fact that the Mishkan was a temporary structure. It didn't even last. By the time the Jewish people come into the land of Israel, we will build a temple. What's the connection? Is there a connection Is there a connection between God's creation of the world and the Jewish people's creation of the Mishkan? I'd like to suggest that there
People
is.
were involved.
I'd like to suggest that there is. People were involved, okay. But in the case of God, Terry, people were not involved in the creation of the universe. Take a
What is-
look.
Well, that's the difference.
Oh, that's the difference. I'm saying, is there a connection? Is there a
Oh,
similarity?
yeah. Sorry.
Take a look at the following. Take a look at the two acts of creation, God's creation of the world and the Jewish people's creation of the Mishkan. I want to suggest that there's an incredible parallel. And I have written these verses side by side. The left column is the universe. The right column is the Mishkan. Let's go through it. At the very beginning, and God made the sky. You see where I'm reading? And God made the two large lights. And God made the beasts of the earth. The word there is made. Take a look in the right column now at the Mishkan. They shall make me a sanctuary. They shall make an ark, make a table. There's a fascinating parallel. God makes the skies, the lights, the beasts. We make a sanctuary, an ark, and a table. Make. Next line. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Look across. Moses saw all the skilled work, and behold, they had done it. It's an incredible parallel. Let's keep going. Back to the creation of the universe. The heavens and earth and all of their array were completed. Look across. All the work of the Mishkan, of the tent of meeting, was completed. Next line down. And God completed all the work that he had done. And Moses completed the work. And God blessed in chapter 2, verse 3. And Moses blessed, chapter 39 of Shemot. And the final comparison, and God sanctified it. And finally, and you shall sanctify it and all its vessels. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible? The key words here are make, see, complete, bless, sanctify, work, and behold. All of these words are said in the same narratives. And it is to suggest as follows. Hear me carefully, because this is a fabulously important idea. It is to suggest the following. Making the Mishkan for the Israelites was the equivalent of what creating the universe was for God. I'll say that again. Creating the Mishkan was for the Israelites what creating the universe was for God. There's an extraordinary act of creation that is happening here. There's a creation by God, and there's a creation by the Bnei Israel, by the Jewish people. However, going forwards, going further, it's so short, it's so small. The creation of the universe is just 34 lines. We will spend half a book talking about the creation of the Mishkan. Why is the creation of this portable home for God almost more than 10 times longer than God's creation of the universe? The universe is vast, whereas the Mishkan was small, it was modest. And I think the answer is, and it's a profound one, is that the Torah is not mankind's book about God, but rather the Torah is God's book about mankind. In other words, it's not difficult for God to create the universe. I know that the universe is spectacular. I know that the universe is 60 trillion light years across, and from a micro scale, we're talking about quarks and the tiniest of sizes of matter that physicists can only hypothesize about, because no one could ever see what's inside of an atom because it's so small. The universe is just enormously big and yet enormously small at the same time. But what is really difficult is not for God to create a universe. What's difficult is for human beings, with all of our vulnerability, missteps and mistakes, what's difficult is for human beings to create a home for God. And yet that is precisely the purpose of what the Mishkan is all about. The Mishkan was about creating a home for God. Where does God live? At first blush, we want to say heaven, but it's not quite accurate. It's not quite accurate. Let me go on a little further. I want to share with you a stunning midrash. This is the Midrash Terumah on Parashat Naso, and it asks a simple question, and it's perhaps the most important question that there ever has been asked. Why does God create the world? That's a big one. Why does God, and I said I wasn't going to be controversial here today. I can already see Peter falling off his chair. Why does God create the world? The Midrash gives the following. Do you want to answer that, by the way, before we jump into this Midrash? Do you want to any take it? Why does God need to create a world? Why would he do that? Surely he has Netflix. I mean, why would he do that? Why would God create the world? Any take? I've biased you already. You want to jump straight into the Midrash? You want to jump straight in? Okay, let's jump straight in. Let's jump straight in. So look at the following. This is an unbelievable Midrash. If you've seen this before, it's incredible. If you've not seen this before, this is going to change your life. Okay, that's fighting talk. That's pretty big introduction. Look at the following. This will change your life. First, we quote a verse in Bamidbar. It came to pass on the day that Moses finished erecting the tabernacle. Okay, we actually have the story of the creation of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, take place not only in Shemot, but also in Bamidbar as well. That is interesting in its own right, but let's leave that for now. Look at the following Midrash. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said, wherever it says in the Torah, and it came to pass, which, by the way, is the opening words that we're quoting in our verse. It came to pass. Wherever it says it came, sorry, the key word is and it came to pass, it refers to something new. Okay. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, wherever it says and it came to pass, it refers to something that existed in the past and was then interrupted and then returned to its original situation. I'll say that again. Wherever it says, and it came to pass, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, this is a new idea now, it refers to something that existed in the past, was then interrupted, and then returned to its original situation. We're going to see. If you're confused right now, don't worry. The Midrash explains itself. Okay? The Midrash explains itself. This is the meaning of the words, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. Quoting another verse from the Bible, this time Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. The Midrash says, this is the meaning of the words, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. When the Holy One, blessed be He, created the universe, He desired to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds, as He has in the upper worlds. Stop there. Boom. That is your life-shattering answer. Why did God create this world? He desired to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds, just as He has up in the heavens. What does that mean? That means that God creates humanity. God creates you and me. God creates this lowly earth, planet Earth. Why? So He can live with us. So He can share this world with us. So He can share existence with us. So He can be a part of our lives down here with us. God doesn't only want to live upstairs in heaven. God desired to have a dwelling place in these lower worlds. That's amazing. That's amazing. Why did God create the world? If someone should ask you this, and by the way, be prepared. You never know. You might be in IGA or Loblaws later this week, and someone's going to bump into you in the fruit and vegetable section, and they'll say, oh, you're involved in the Shah Learning Center. You take Rabbi Shia's classes. Let me ask you, why did God create the world? So it could very easily happen. And you'll say, oh, that's a very good question. Listen, my friend, I can tell you the answer. The reason God created this world was because He wanted to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds, just as He has up in the upper worlds too. But how, and here's the crux of the matter, how does God have a dwelling place in the lower worlds? Simple. We create the opportunity for Him to live with us down here. I'll say that again. We create the opportunity for God to live with us down here. However, it's complicated because the Midrash goes on. God summoned Adam and said, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But Adam transgressed the command. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to him, this is what I wanted, that just as I have a dwelling place in the upper worlds, I wish to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds. I commanded you one thing and you did not keep it. Immediately, God withdrew His presence to the heavens. Where was God living in the period of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? Where was God living? The answer is
The tree of knowledge.
in the Garden of Eden. God was living with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. He created heaven on earth. We call it, in English, paradise. This is the most incredible place in all of the world. But there was a relationship that was supposed to happen in paradise. And that relationship was based on not eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And Adam broke that one rule. And God turns around and says to him, you had one rule. I told you don't eat from the tree. This was all I wanted, was to live with you down here on earth. But I see the two of us can't live with each other. You don't want me here, and so I will go. You don't want to listen to my rules. You don't want to abide by my relationship. You don't want to live your life together with me. Fine. Go on your own. Gesundheit. I'll leave you. And where does God retract to? He goes up one level into the first level of heaven, no longer living down here on earth. What happens next?
Like Tzimtzum.
Very good, Sandra. God contracts himself like Tzimtzum. A mystical idea of God contracting himself, God leaving, God removing himself from this world. What happens after Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? My friends, I've got bad news for you. It goes from bad to worse. Cain kills Abel. What happens next? God says, all I wanted was to live with you in earth. I wanted to dwell among you, but your behavior is the very opposite of what I'm trying to achieve. And therefore, what? God ascends higher to the next level of heaven and enters level 2. After Cain kills Abel, it gets worse. We then have Noah and the flood. The world is so evil that God destroys it. I wanted to live here with you. God descends to the third. God ascends, to the third level of heaven. After Noah and the flood, we have the Tower of Babel and all of humanity trying to wage war against God. God says, I just want to live down here with you. You're not making room for me. I'm going to leave you and ascend to the fourth level of heaven, and so on and so forth. And the Midrash goes through step by step by step by step by step of God leaving humanity. Or better, let me say it better, humanity not creating space for God to live with us down here. Until the very end of the process, what is the situation? God is living in seventh heaven. You're familiar with the English phrase seventh heaven. What does that mean? Colloquially, it's like the best of the best, right? Oh, I'm in seventh heaven. You can't get better than that. Why can't you get better than that? Because there's nothing higher than the seventh level of heaven. That's where God lives. But the Midrash doesn't finish there. Amazingly, the Midrash says, however, there came along one person after God retreated from this world level by level by level. And he was such an exceptional, incredible human being that what did he do? He brought God down a level, back to level 6. What was the name of that person?
Abraham Avinu.
Abraham. And after him, Yitzchak, Isaac. And Isaac brought God down to level 5. And after him, Jacob, Yaakov, brought God down a little level closer to earth. And after him, Yosef. And following Yosef, and we go down and until Moshe Rabbeinu. And what happens with Moshe Rabbeinu? Amazingly, let us continue in the Midrash. Then came Moshe and brought the divine presence down to earth. When, this is all the Midrash, when the Mishkan was erected. Then the Holy One, blessed be he, said, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have come to that which I desired from the outset. And this is the meaning of it came to pass on the day that Moses finished erecting the Mishkan. The source of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's statement that wherever it says, and it came to pass, it refers to something that existed in the past, was then interrupted, and then returned to its original situation. Stunning. Absolutely stunning. What originally existed in its original state? God living down here with us in humanity. In the Garden of Eden, we were as close as possible. Yet when the verse says, and it came to pass when Moses established the Mishkan, it means that something was originally there, God's presence, was then interrupted. God ascends to the highest levels of heaven and then returns to its original state where it first was at the beginning. God descends back once again to be able to live among us, among humanity. When the Mishkan was finally erected, and as a result, God's presence was able to dwell among us and be a part of the Jewish people. Isn't that an incredible midrash?
Lovely.
Now, I want to develop this idea, but I want to pause here to make sure that we're all on the same page. So far, so good. Everyone has understood what we've achieved so far, what we've been explaining so far. Okay,
Yeah.
questions or comments at this stage? Observations, thoughts?
The king needs his people, otherwise he's not a king.
A king needs his people, otherwise he's not a king.
Crown him a king, otherwise who's he a king for?
Okay.
Well, that's giving Hashem, saying Hashem has needs. I don't know if Hashem has needs. We're anthropomorphizing Hashem.
So
Well,
Sandra, amazing question. And if you look at the language of the Midrash says God desired a dwelling place in the lower levels. And that's an amazing idea. What is this talking about? God's desire. When is there desire? There is only desire by definition when there's a lack. I can only desire something if I don't have it. I don't have the ice cream. So when I walk past the ice cream shop, I desire an ice cream because I currently don't have an ice cream. Amazingly, this midrash is being anthropomorphic and it's saying God has desires. And what is God's fundamental desire? To live down here on earth. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Okay, let's go further. Let's go further because I want to develop this idea. I want to develop this idea because somebody mentioned it before. I think it might have been Sandra or somebody else. What we have here is a concept of God retracting himself from this world, creating a sense of self-limitation. And by the way, the word for world, what is the word for world in Hebrew? Olam. What is the root of the word olam? Where does that word come from? Ne'elam. Ne'elam means hidden.
Disappear.
To be hidden.
Hidden.
For God to create a world, and the word for disappear, it's one and the same. World and disappear. Hiddenness. In other words, for there to be the possibility of free will, of choice, of moral responsibility, God cannot be an overbearing presence in our world. If God was in front of us at every single moment of our lives, would we have the opportunity to do the wrong thing? Would we even have free choice to be able to make choices in our lives? If God was too overbearing, we wouldn't be able to live our lives. God is the ultimate parent. And unless a parent lets go of the child will never learn to walk. I know there's nothing more painful as a new parent than seeing your child fall over. They hurt their knees, they fall, they cry, and it's heartbreaking for the parent. Yet there comes a time that the parent has to let go. Because if the parent is going to take the child by the hand always, then the child will not learn to walk. And so it is with all other forms of learning. At various stages, a parent must progressively withdraw to leave room for the child to grow. So too with God. Hear me carefully. This is one of the most important messages I can give you. So too with God. God must withdraw if humanity, which is created in his image, if humanity is able to then mature and grow up and become God's partner in the creation of this world. Creation, in other words, is an act of divine self-limitation. I'll say that again. It's so important. Creation is an act of divine self-limitation. But now we come to an incredible paradox, because, okay, I get it. If God's perceptible everywhere, then there's no room for mankind. We won't be able to live. We won't be able to be free. We won't be able to make choices. But if God is perceptible nowhere, well, how can we as humanity know him, reach him, understand him, know what he wants from us? And the answer is already hinted at in the creation of the universe. God reserves special dimensions for where we can meet him. He's not there always. He's not overbearing. He's not overpowerful. But there are certain dimensions occasionally where we have a rendezvous. And fascinatingly, they happen in space and they happen in time. Let's start with time. It's easier. When do we have a rendezvous with God in time? Every
Shabbat.
seventh day.
Shabbat.
Every seventh day, we have a rendezvous with time, with God. And by the way, sevens are such an important number that every seventh month, we have a special rendezvous with God. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot are all in the seventh month. By the way, is there a special law that we have with the agriculture of the land of Israel? Yes, in the seventh year, the land shall lie fallow. And then in the Jubilee year, after 7 sets of 7 years, we have a special rendezvous with God. Another area where we have a hint in creation of God reserving himself for particular moments, not moments this time in space or time, but moments among peoples, happens after the division of 70 nations. Because after multiple languages and civilizations are created, we then come to the covenantal people, the Jewish people, the children of Israel. And the third dimension is in the dimension of space. There is a divine point where godliness will emerge from hiddenness to exposure, from concealment to revealed aspects. And just as Shabbat is to time, stay with me for this, so too is the Mishkan for space. I'll say that again. Just as Shabbat is to time, so is the Mishkan for space. Shabbat is a rendezvous with God in time, 1 day out of 7. The Mishkan was our rendezvous with God in space. It was an area, a location, a physical place in this world that was set aside, that was holy, that was God's domain. It was the place where heaven and earth meet. And that's why now we understand this level. That's why the creation of the Mishkan by the Bnei Israel in the desert was the counterpart of the creation of the universe by God. Let's look again. The universe, and God made, and God made, and God made the Mishkan, and they shall make, and they shall make, they shall make. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Moses saw all the skilled work, and behold, and the heavens and the earth and all their array were completed. And all the work of the Mishkan was completed. And God completed all of the work. And Moses completed the work. God blessed. Moshe blessed. Sanctified. And sanctified. The creation of the Mishkan by the Bnei Israel is the counterpart of the creation of the universe by God. And what happens in this act of creation? It's what happens in every act of creation. Both sides start to make space for the other. It's the ultimate parent model, where you start to make space for the other. There are moments in our lives where if we can make space for an other, then what we're able to achieve is for the other to flourish to the best of their abilities. And I want to suggest that we can take this idea a step further and see it written into all of human history, written large. Let me share with you a stunning idea. A lot of people will ask me, and over the years, many people have said a fundamental basic question that most people have. God made so many miracles back then in the days of the Torah. Why doesn't God make miracles now? He split the sea, manna from heaven, the 10 plagues. Where are our miracles today? And I want to suggest that human history is a developmental process where God is the ultimate parent. In the beginning of a child's life, you have to hold that child by the hand when you're walking down the sidewalk. They could just take off into the road. It would be inappropriate if you walk down the sidewalk with a little toddler not holding onto their hand. They run in every direction. It's unsafe. Now imagine, perhaps, let's say you're a grandparent and you're holding your 10-year-old grandson, granddaughter's hand. What could be more beautiful? You see your grandson, you see your grandchild, you hold their hand, they're 10, they're delicious, they're wonderful, they're fantastic. Holding their hand, it's amazing. And sometimes the parents will hold their hands. But now imagine that the child is an 18-year-old and they can't walk down the street without the parent holding them by the hand. And now let's say that they've gotten on a little bit in years and they've gotten married and they've found a spouse and they want to go for a walk and they're happily in love. And as the camera angle pans out a little bit, you find the parents still holding them by the hand. At some point, they're never being allowed the room to grow, the room to come into their own sense of independence. At some point, what was once love becomes stifling. I believe it's exactly the same with God in human history. When were all of the miracles performed? When we, as the Jewish people, were in our childhood. When we were in our childhood. And there you need someone to take you by the hand. And what word and phrase do we have again and again and again in the Torah? And with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, right? That's God holding us by the hand. And yet at a certain point in human history, God says, I'm going to back off. Not that I'm not going to be here anymore, but I'm going to recede into the background, allowing you the room to grow. And as you grow and become independent, you'll be able to live your life coming into your own fullness. There is only one holiday. I'm jumping now. You'll excuse me, but I'm now jumping. There's only one holiday where when we read the Megillah celebrating that holiday, God's name is not mentioned anywhere. In 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, in 10 days, what holiday are we all celebrating?
Purim.
Purim. God's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. And if you read the Megillah, it could read like a haphazard chance coincidence of political machinations and incredible decisions that were taken on political levels that led to what was nearly a destruction, but it ended up being with a salvation. Purim's greatness is the celebration that God is not there holding us by the hand. Now, of course, he's in the background. But ever since Purim, God became hidden in Jewish history, giving us the opportunity to come into our own and to thrive, and as a result, allowing us to mature. This is the process of human history. This is the reason that miracles are not so commonplace anymore, even though they once were at the very beginning of our childhood, our national childhood. And this too is ultimately the idea of the Mishkan. Create for me a sanctuary that I may dwell among you. All I wish, says God, is to be among you. Allow for relationship. Just as Shabbat is to time, so too the Mishkan is to space. There will be moments where we can have a rendezvous with each other. And in the meantime, live your lives. Become your best selves, knowing that I'm always here. And when the time is right, we will once again get together.
But doesn't that bother you when it comes to certain points in Jewish history, whether it be 1492 in the Spanish Inquisition or the pogroms or the Crusades and then ultimately the Holocaust? If God is hidden from us in history, it's problematic.
Sandra, I think your question is already the seeds of the answer. Because the thesis I'm presenting is that God is hidden in history. And you're saying that when such moments happen, we become exposed and vulnerable to the cruelties of the nations. And that's precisely the point. God doesn't come down swooping on a fiery chariot to save us from our enemies. And it's devastating and it's awful. And the worst crimes of humanity have been perpetrated against us. But if you remember last week's Torah portion, no sooner have we crossed the sea and seen the 10 plagues and see the splitting of the sea, what's the very next thing we read? And the Jewish people start to complain. Miracle after miracle, and like a little kid. There's no water. Where's the water? I want a drink of water. Can you get me a cup of water? When God's exposure is too much, is too overwhelming, there's not room for growth. Does that mean we're left with radical freedom, and even humanity has radical freedom to choose to rebel against God, to even choose great tragedies that have befallen our people? Absolutely. But if we're consistent, Sandra, the question itself contains the answer. Fascinating. Thoughts, comments?
Still doesn't make me feel better.
Well, that's why we have Purim in 10 days' time, because we're still here. Haman tried to destroy us, we're still here. And every Haman throughout the history of our people, we're still here. We're still making Kiddush on Friday night. We're still singing in Shul. We're still celebrating. And Baruch Hashem, we'll even get dressed up on Purim. And we'll celebrate that in this topsy-turvy world, history is almost wearing a mask. And you can't see who's behind the veil. But we know that there is someone behind that veil. They're just wearing a mask. This is why we dress up on Purim. We are wearing our deepest theology. Human history as God's veiled mask. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Good.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
And
Food
I
for
always
thought.
thought God had to give us such detailed instructions to build a Mishkan because Jews aren't good at fixing things. And if there were Italian artisans there in the desert with us, they would have built it without the instructions. But they weren't here.
There was no IKEA manual for this. It was complicated. It was complicated.
Thank you.
From an architectural point of view, the Mishkan is a piece of architectural genius. It's also very appropriate in the context of a nomadic nation, which had to develop a way of continuing to move through the landscape with the shelter that is described. I do have one question. If the
Please.
Mishkan was the selected place to receive God,
Yes.
how does that square with the concept that God is everywhere?
Amazing question. It has to be asked, that question. It has to be asked. And I think the answer is that it's a massive question you're asking, Peter, and much Jewish philosophy has been dedicated to it. I'm going to answer the question with a glib one-liner. So I'm giving this introduction so that you know that there's more to say on the matter. But I think the best answer is a one-liner, and that is, yes, God exists everywhere. Oh, absolutely. And when we have such a tiny little structure that we're taking the infinite nature of God and we're saying, live in this ark, live in this box, what we're really saying is, or what God is saying to us is, I am everywhere and I'm prepared to live with you when you will let me in.
Nice answer.
That's why it says V'shachanti b'tocham and not V'shachanti b'tocho. In other words, God is not saying I'm going to live in the tabernacle. He said, I want to live within you. Bilvavi Mishkan Evna. I want every one of you to be able to accept me. And I think when we pray, even though God is all over, the people, me, I need a place that I can have a relationship with God that is not all over, whether it's the Beit Knesset, whether it's a corner in my house, it doesn't make a difference. I have to know that there is one place that when I'm there, that's my relationship with God. Even though he's all over, I need something a little bit more personal, something that I can call my own.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Maimonides says something similar to that in the Guide for the Perplexed. He says that human beings can never conceptualize infinity. It's not something a finite mind could ever think of. So instead, we have a place where we, even though we know theologically God is beyond this place, it's like the Kotel. If you've ever been to the Kotel in Jerusalem, you have this feeling of like, oh, wow, God is right here. But if I was to ask you, do you believe God lives in central Jerusalem, just off to the left of the mall, and there's a big wall there, and is that where God lives theologically? You'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, and yet, human beings, we're hardwired that if you give us a location and the symbolism is drenched with meaning, then that's how we can come to an understanding and appreciation of getting close to God. Maimonides says something similar to that in the Guide for the Perplexed. So, yes, we're already into the complexity of the answer, Peter. But before we even go there, I'll stick with my first one-liner. God is everywhere, and we live with him wherever we are prepared to let him in. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
We will pause
Thank
here.
you.
I will wish you a good Erev Shabbos. Have a beautiful Shabbat.
Thank you.
And please God, Rabbi Shai will be back next Thursday. So then you can ask him all of these hard questions, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Shabbat shalom. Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom. Be
Yeah.
well, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom.